Hey students, today we are on lesson 4-2, estimate the product of a decimal and a whole number. I need you to make sure you have your workbook and a pencil out, please, so that you can follow along. We are on page 133. Here's our learning goal for today. I can use rounding to estimate a product. Alrighty, so here's our solve and share problem for 4-2. Again, we are on page 133 and you should have your workbook and a pencil out. Let's read through the problem and then I will let you try to solve on your own and then we'll go through it together. Renee needs 32 strands of twine for an art project. Each strand must measure 1 and 2,500 centimeters long. About how many centimeters of twine does she need? So we really need to pay attention to the about right there because that's going to tell us that we need to estimate in order to solve. So she needs about 32 strands of twine and each one needs to be 1 and 2,500. So go ahead and pause the video here, see if you can round and find an estimated answer. Okay. Let's go ahead and work through this together. Now, what we know about rounding is sometimes you can round in different ways. So the way that you chose to round might not be the first way that I put up here, and that's okay. So if she needs she needs 32 strands of twine, and each one is 1 and 2,500. Well, the first thing that my brain did was, okay, well, if I round this down to 1, because if I'm rounding to my whole number, look next door at my 2. If you think about our rule, 0 through 4, just ignore, then my 1 is just going to stay the same. And then I could leave 32 as is, do 32 times 1, and she would need about 32 centimeters of twine. That's one way that you could have done it. And this is true, but this is an underestimation. So if she goes into the store and she only gets 32 centimeters, well, will she have enough? No, she won't. So in certain situations, now, say that I would count this as correct because you used rounding, you found about how much, and then she would need to know, oh, I'll have to get a little more than that if she went to the store. But you might have wanted to overestimate just to make sure you would have enough. So if you did 32 strands of twine and left that alone, and then you might have chose to round 1 and 2,500 up to 2, just to make sure that she would have enough twine at home and then would probably have some left over. Well, then you can multiply those guys. 2 times 2 is 4, 6, and so she's getting double what she would get. But remember, this is an underestimation. We are leaving off 1/4 of a centimeter every single time. So this one is going to put her in the clear. She will for sure have enough if she gets 64 centimeters, but this is going to be an overestimation for sure. But either way that you chose to do it, you would get an answer. Our final answer would be somewhere in between these two since we rounded down here and up here. And it just depends on how you rounded it. Okay, let's go ahead and click over to our visual learning bridge. All right, what are some ways to estimate products and whole numbers? So here's our problem over here. A wedding planner needs to buy 16 pounds of sliced cheddar cheese. About how much will the cheese cost? So we can use different strategies to estimate a product. The words about how much mean you only need an estimation. You don't need to find the exact number for this. Of course, if you were this wedding planner, you would probably want the actual budget, want the actual amount that it's going to cost, because the bride is going to want to know. All right, let's go ahead and move down to the bottom part. It was $2.15 per pound. She needed 16 pounds. So one way is to round each number to the nearest dollar and nearest 10. So we're rounding to the largest place value that we can. That's something that we did back in unit, I think 1 and 2. So they underline their largest whole number that they could round to. So it was 2 here, or the 10th place here. Look next door at the 1. Well, the 1, 0 through 4, remember, ignore. And then 5 through 9 was add 1 more. So my 1 is going to keep my 2, and so you just have $2 there. This one is going to look next door at the 6, and that is in our 5 through 9, so we need to add 1 more to our 6 and then zero out the rest of our number. So our estimated problem here is 2 times 20, which gives us 40. So the cheese will cost about $40. So making sure to include that in our answer so that whoever was reading it knows we were estimating, just like they put about in the problem. So another way to do this is to use compatible numbers. And if you think back, we talked about compatible numbers with adding or making tens. So like our 4 plus 6 gets us to a 10. So if I had 24 plus 16, I would know, oh, that 4 and that 6 is going to make another 10. And that 2 and the 1 make 30, plus 1 more would be 40. So you can use compatible numbers to multiply and add. Now, what they decided to do here is they took their $2.15 and they rounded it to 2. And then the 16 they took down to 15 because they knew that was something that they could multiply or double easily in their head, and they get about $30. So what you'll notice here is both of these numbers were rounded down. So their estimation down here, the cheese will cost about $30. Well, if you round both numbers down, that's going to give us an underestimation. And you know, they would definitely be over that, especially when you take into account how much are, even though they rounded up here, that's a little bit of an overestimation, but you want to make sure you have enough cheese at your wedding, I guess. So there's different ways to round. If you're someone who wants to just stick with our rule over here, then I think that's great. If compatible numbers really make sense to you and you want to give that a try today, that works too. Okay, let's go ahead and try a couple problems. Let's start with number 1. We've got a word problem over here. So number 1 says, there are about 20 school days in a month. In the problem above, how many miles does Manuel walk each month? Write an equation to show your work. So if you're on page 135, great. Let's take a peek at that problem right above. And if you're not there yet, please open up your workbook to page 135. So Manuel walks a total of 7,500 miles to and from school each day. If there have been 105 school days so far, how many miles has he walked in all? So we just need that 0 and 7,500 because that's how much he's walking daily. And so we just needed that last problem a little bit to get part of our information for this. So it says about how many miles does he walk each month if there's 20 school days in a month. So this is the actual problem that we would be doing. However, we're going to use rounding in order to solve today. So my 20, that number ends in a 0. Multiplying by 2 isn't too challenging. So I think that's a number that we could leave right where it is because it almost looks like we already rounded it, right? But we're just going off the 20 days. Now our 7,500s, we could round to the nearest whole number. If I look next door at my 7, number 0 through 4, we ignore. 5 through 9 plus 1 more. So my 7 is between 5 and 9. So I need to add 1 more to the 0. So 0 plus 1 is 1. So what I'm going to have here is 1 times 20, which would be about 20 miles. And then we'd be done. Now, it's going to be an overestimation because we went up a quarter of a mile, but that's okay because we are estimating and finding a close or approximate answer. Okay, let's work through a couple over here, estimating and using rounding or compatible numbers. All right, so for this first one, we have 87 hundredths and times 112. So what I might do here is think about rounding to the nearest whole number. So if I underline the 0, and then I'm going to just round this one first because you're going to notice what we round to, and then we won't really have to do much with this number next to it. So my 0 is going to look next door at my 8. My 87 hundredths honestly is almost 1 whole. So we're going to have 1 times, well, we could just leave our 112 alone because 1 times any number is the other number. So we would have about 112, right? Okay, Let's take a peek at number 5. So for this one, we have 9 and 200ths times 80. Well, I'm going to round to the nearest whole number here. My 9 is going to look next door at my 0. 0 through 4, we're just going to ignore. So I'm going to round that down 200ths, or if you could think 2 pennies, to 9. And so then I'm going to multiply that by 80. And I'm going to just leave 80 as is because I can do 9 times 8 in my head, or I could use my multiplication chart in order to solve that and then add my 0 into it at the end. So 9 times 8 is 72. And then I have 1 0 there, so I add 1 0 to the end of it. And we get 720. Okay, let's take a look at one more, and then I'll give you one to try on your own. So why don't we do, let's try number 6 because I want to talk about multiplying by a half. So if I'm looking at number 6, I have 54 hundredths times 24. Now you might be thinking, okay, well I would just round this up to 1 whole and be done with it. Well, I kind of want to talk about if we multiply a number by 5/10, you were actually finding half of the other number you're multiplying it by. So for example, if I had 10 times 5/10, I'm taking 10 and I'm finding half of it. And so this answer would actually be 5. And so as we're getting into decimals, you will notice when we multiply by a number that's less than 1 whole, our answer actually gets smaller, which is totally weird because all this time we've been thinking, oh, when I multiply, it's going to get bigger. Well, when you multiply by a half, you're actually cutting it in half. So 10 cut in half is 5. So let's take a look at number 6. We have 54 hundredths times 24. Well, if I round to where this 5 is and look next door at my 4, my 4's, we're just going to ignore it because the 4 won't change my 5. And I'll just have 5/10, which is really, it's only 4 pennies away from 54 hundredths because you could have 50 hundredths. And so you're very, very close. Now, if I multiply 24 by 5/10, I'm actually cutting 24 in half. You're finding half of 24. Well, I know that's 12. So then my estimated answer would be 12. So when you have a number like 3/10 or 33 hundredths, rounding to that half is going to get you a closer number than multiplying by 0 because any number times 0 is just 0. So while your answer might be like smaller than what you're starting with here with the 104, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. If I did 104 times 0, I get 0. Well, that's not a very accurate guess because if I took 104 times actually 33 hundredths, I wouldn't get something close to 0. Now, what we could try is 104, or even I could just round down and I could do 100 times, if I, instead of doing 33 hundredths, I could do 50 hundredths or 5/10. Remember, those are equivalent decimals. And I'm going to get a closer answer. And so this is more using the compatible numbers rather than rounding. It's a little bit more reasoning, so it can be kind of trickier. So if I take 100 and cut it in half or multiply it by 5/10, I get 50. And so if I were to actually multiply 104 times 33, I'm gonna do it really quick. I don't have my phone, so let's do it over here. So if I had 104 times 33 hundredths, I multiply it through like normal, and we'll get to this more later, but I just want to show you guys. Two, 3, 4, 3, and my decimals here. So for this one, I have 34 and 32 hundredths for the actual answer. And so that's closer to 50 than it would be to 0 because we know, well, 25 would be in between. And you don't ever want to estimate, underestimate down to a 0 because then your answer is just totally off from what it would be. So using that halfway marker can be really helpful in today's lesson. Okay, I want you to try, let's give number 7 a try. Okay, so 33 and 5 hundredths times 200, use your rounding, and then see what you get. Alrighty, I'll see you in group.